This is Legal Live with Eddie and Chuck Farah. They're talking the latest legal news and answering your questions. To call Legal Live and ask Eddie and Chuck a question, grab your phone and dial 855-765-1045. That's 855-765-1045.
Welcome. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by 104.5 WOKV. And we are here with two long-standing attorneys with the Farah Farah Group. We've got Brian and Rick. How are you guys doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you for having us.
We're doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
You guys have been with Farah Farah for like 19, 20 years?
Long time. I started in my childhood, so it's
in your childhood.
as we've aged, but it does catch up with you the years. But yeah, it's been quite over 20 years for me.
My goodness,
and just about 20 years, a little bit less than 20 years for me. So and it's been wonderful.
It's been wonderful, truly. It's a great experience, a great firm to be with.
I can imagine. Yes, I know our listeners really love Eddie and Chuck, and it's so nice to have you guys in the studio today. And welcome, our listeners. We are talking to Brian Flaherty and Rick Staggard from Farah Farah. We would love to hear from you guys today. Your calls are so important to us here on Legal Live. Our phone number is 855-765-1045. Feel free to call in. So, guys, today, it's a beautiful Saturday. I just got back from the Touch a Truck event. You guys have shown up. You guys are lovely. We've had great conversations so far.
Very much.
What would you guys like to start off the show with today?
Well, before we get to legal issues, I want to give a call out to a good friend, my buddy Bear Iraqi. He's in the I-9 Flag Football Championship game today at 12 at Bulls Field. Bear's team is 6-0 going into the championship, and his coach is our good friend, Dan Iraqi, and I wanted to give a call out to Bear, tell him, go Bear, make us proud.
Go Bears!
Yeah, absolutely.
Go Bear, for sure, absolutely.
Wanted to make sure I got that covered. He's an adorable young man, and I want to see him do very, very well. But, Rick and I were going to talk today a little bit about some of the major issues coming up with the legislature on the issue of tort reform.
It's busy time in Tallahassee for consumers. There is a major bill over there that would change the rights of consumers to pursue claims for personal injuries, and there are several components to the bill, and some of them are really going to affect people that may want to make a claim if they've been injured in a crash.
Really?
Yes.
Very profound. They're very, very big changes that we haven't seen in decades. One of the things being discussed right now, for example, is statute of limitations. You have 4 years to bring a negligence claim in Florida in most instances, and yet now they're talking very seriously about limiting to 2 years.
Oh, really?
Oh, sure. And that's going to have profound effects. And it's going to be even more interesting with governmental entities because you have to give notice to the government if you're going to sue them in any capacity for a false arrest or excessive force. You have to give notice within 3 years under the statute. And obviously, if they change the statute to 2 years, they're probably going to cut that down to maybe a year. So you have to very much be aware of these changes in the event that you're involved in a situation in which you think you need to go forward with any form of litigation because we can't get by statute of limitations issue. It's an absolute end all for any case if you go past it, even 1 day.
I would think it would be a year, and it's actually formal notice that we have to provide. So if you have an accident that's caused, let's say by a JSO cruiser,
right?
You've got to provide the city and JSO with formal notice. Right now it's within 3 years, but if they cut down the statute of limitations for filing a lawsuit, then that is going to probably be reduced to a year.
Yeah.
I came from down here from New Jersey. That notice time period was actually 90 days up in New Jersey, so it's quick.
Wow.
And if you don't provide it within that time period, then you're forever barred from bringing any type of legal claim for that accident.
What makes it even more profound with a governmental entity, you have to give very specific types of notice under the statute. So if they change it and limit it to a year and you get one thing wrong because your notice is deficient, then that alone could knock you out. And like I said, it really takes away people's right to have access to the court system. And you have to question the validity of why is that being done. I mean, I didn't know that in all the decades we've been handling this, with 4 years, we needed to cut it down to 2. I didn't know there was a justification for that really is profound, and I don't see that right to the consumer to be able to pursue something that they don't know about right away. Sometimes it takes a while to figure out if you need to go forward. And you don't want to encourage people to bring litigation too early that is potentially not justified, and it puts the system in harm's way, puts the individual in harm's way, and frankly, it's just not productive. But there's a lot of things going on along those lines that people have questions about right now, and I don't know how this is going to play out.
And
Wow.
Brian, you touched on something that I thought of as well. We've still got a court backlog due to COVID.
Oh,
the
huge.
courts
That's
were
true.
closed for a considerable period of
It's
time,
absolutely huge.
and it's still taking longer for our clients to be able to get their cases to trial.
Mm-hmm.
And now, if you're going to shorten the statute of limitations, there's going to be more lawsuits filed because lawyers are going to have to file cases that they might otherwise be able to resolve without a lawsuit.
Pre-litigation,
I
which
see.
is where contrary to what you hear a lot in public, most cases resolve pre-litigation. We work
And that
very
means
often
without a lawsuit, without
very much
actually
so,
having to
without
file
that.
a
I
lawsuit.
see.
without tying
see.
up the court system. And the judges are overwhelmed because COVID has set a backlog that has caused years of delay, and years meaning into the future. And now you line up in a queue, and you hope to be the 10th or 11th trial, and you just don't know what's going to happen. And the problem is it's added expenses for the system as well, because when we get closer to trial, I have one coming up in April, and they filed notice of conflict with 3 other cases, and the case I have coming up in April, and I have to call that up for a case management conference so the court can decide whether or not our case is prioritized or not. My client wants her day in court, but more importantly, we're going to spend a lot of money to secure witnesses to come to court in advance. Her doctors have to testify, and that means time away from their practices.
Right.
And that's a very expensive thing to have happen, and then to be told at the last minute that we're going to be continued for 6 months or a year, and that's going to be an added expense to the case and added expense to the system. And that's just not productive. And so you really have to question the validity of some of these things being discussed in terms of fairness and in terms of expense to the consumer and to the system.
That's interesting. And it really affects the individual person who deserves their day in court if they've been injured or if they've, if it takes so long for the case to even get any action or movement. That's time that this person may be suffering with bills that they can't pay or suffering with injuries that they're still healing from.
It's very true. It breaks people financially very often because they're unable to continue with, say, the line of work that they're doing.
Right.
They have to leave work, or they can't do it as often. And then it has effects in potentially their education, their family. There's so many, ripple effects that really go down the line. And it's just very, very unfair because if it's going to have to be tried, you want to try it at the earliest possible time so that you can be in front of the jury so you can let them decide really where this goes.
Plus, when you file a lawsuit, you place your entire life under a microscope. And if it goes on for a year, 2 years, 3 years, there's a lot of people that get very stressed out just being involved in a lawsuit because they know that their life is under a microscope for that entire period of time. So, and that's kind of like an unknown, unintended consequence.
I see. Well, this is a really interesting topic. And right now we do have to go to a quick break at this time. And but I would love to encourage our listeners, if you have an issue like this, give us a call at 855-765-1045. I'm Sheifalika, and you're listening to Legal Live, and we've got our guest hosts today, Brian and Rick. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back. You're listening to Legal Live on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. I'm Sheifalika, and I'm joined today by Brian and Rick, and we've got some interesting topics ahead of us. First, I kind of want to start off with the next topic you guys were talking about over the break. What is it?
We're talking about protecting yourself on the roadways, and there's a number of ways that you can do that.
That's right.
And there was a couple things we were actually talking about, which is put a dash camera inside your car, because if there's ever a dispute over how the crash occurred, that's a good way of resolving that dispute. I had a client a couple of years ago, and she was driving on Interstate 75, very, very serious injuries. And when we looked at the crash report, we saw that the driver of the other vehicle, a tractor trailer, had said that she swerved into his lane, which would have made it very difficult for her in her claim because she didn't remember the crash. That's how bad it was.
Oh, my goodness.
And so, but she had dash camera. 78-year-old woman had dash camera in her
Way
vehicle.
to go.
Makes all the difference in the world. And
Yeah.
you don't have to, the camera doesn't lie, and the quality of the film is amazing. And when they see it, it makes things so much easier when they're telling you a story and the camera backs up that story. It's a huge deal, and we really encourage everybody to seriously get that dash camera in their car and to understand how it works. Some actually have it on the Teslas and some others that are there, but you need to understand the importance of it. The other thing, and I've been on the show some years ago, and we talked about the subject of coverage, and a lot of people don't understand, and I see this with clients all the time, and it really affects their ability to have a case if they're seriously injured, is what's called uninsured or underinsured motorist, coverage. And when you watch all those TV commercials, they'll talk about all this foolishness, but you'll never hear the words uninsured motorist coverage. Insurance companies don't want to sell it. And the reason they don't want to sell it is they don't know statistically whether you or I or Rick tonight would get hit by someone who has no coverage, who's irresponsible and negligent and has seriously hurt us. So they don't, if they can't quantify it, they don't like to sell it. And it's something that everybody needs. It's a big deal at a later point, and I've carried it most of my adult life. And it's very important. If you don't know to have it, you need to look into it with your insurance company and your agent. And the other thing is, if you've got multiple vehicles in the house, you want to stack that coverage. It makes it even more important when you have it. If you have 3 vehicles there, you stack a $100,000 policy, then you have $300,000. And it's a big deal at a later point.
And people are not required in Florida, even part of this legislation over in Tallahassee right now, they're not changing the fact that people are not required to carry bodily injury coverage. So if I'm driving, you don't have to have coverage for the injury that you may cause to others on the roadway. That's not required in Florida. I'm licensed in both Florida and Georgia. It is required in Georgia, a minimum of $25,000, but it's not required in Florida. So you do expose yourself to potentially getting hurt by somebody that's got no insurance coverage. You can protect yourself by buying underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage, but they don't want to sell you that. They really do not like selling that to you because they can't, from an insurance company perspective, they can't evaluate the risk.
Yep.
Yeah.
Brian and I, they know our background, so when we buy liability coverage for our negligence to others, they know what we are in terms of a risk, but uninsured motorists, you just don't know because it can be so random.
That's right. That's why when you have a 16-year-old, you pay outrageous rates because they don't have a history. And then later on, when you pass the mark, especially for young men at 25, they know you have some history, so they can judge you on it. So you get to a certain point, and then your rates are reflective of your own actions.
Right.
But they don't know for coverage exactly what could happen tonight, as I said, with Rick or you or I. And I had a client last year who followed my advice afterwards when he didn't have proper coverage. He added a large amount of coverage and stacked it in his household. And not 3 months later, his wife was seriously injured in a car crash.
Oh, my goodness.
No fault of hers. And, of course, that made a huge difference in regard to the case itself.
Right.
The other thing I want to briefly touch on, and people don't really think about it beyond coverage, is what's called medical payment or MedPay. When you buy insurance, auto insurance, it's one of those things you kind of overlook and don't give a lot of thought to. MedPay is a real big deal. PIP covers you up to the first $10,000. That's right away. And if you go to an emergency room, it's gone before you're out of the emergency room.
Right.
But from that point,
if you take an ambulance, it's gone.
From that
Before
point
you
on,
get checked out and you get a couple of CAT scans at some of the local hospitals, your $10,000 is eaten up very quickly.
Yeah. And if you have health insurance, you're in a much better position. But even then, you've got co-payments and you've got deductibles and you've got other things that could really affect your health insurance. But before you would get to your health insurance, you'd have this MedPay. And MedPay can make a huge difference regarding the amount that's there. And I've been in myself, no fault of mine, both times I was stopped, I was hit. One time I damaged my ankle. The other time I'd had my left shoulder reconstructed. But the MedPay made a huge difference for me before I got into my health insurance on both occasions.
Right.
And I've had it for many, many years, and I really encourage people. It's not expensive. It's something that's very important to have on your auto insurance policy, and you really want to look into getting it done. Now, I hate to have to sell auto insurance in any form. The insurance companies do quite well. But that's the kind of coverage you absolutely need for yourself in the event that something that is no fault of yours happens.
I think it's a really great idea. I wasn't fully aware that auto insurance could provide medical coverage as well, other than just reconstructing your vehicle or just for covering the crash itself and minor injuries. Uninsured motorist coverage, medical payment coverage.
Yes.
Those are really good tips.
It is good coverage to have. Medical payments pays 100% of your medical expenses up to whatever the limits of your policy are. Yep. So even if you've got just a sprain, strain, or a soft tissue injury and you need 6, 8, 12 weeks of physical therapy, if you're putting that on your health insurance, you're going to have some healthy copays, or you're going to have a large deductible.
Very much.
And if you've got the medical payments coverage, that pays it at 100%. So, and by the way, the outrageous rates don't stop at 16-year-olds, Brian. I've got a 22 and a 20-year-old, and we're still paying outrageous rates. So.
It is. It seems like a magical formula to you 25 or so, and then it drops down. But it used to be when it shows you how far back I go. It's next year will be 40 years. But back in the dark ages, when we first started practicing before cell phones, it used to be that young women were significantly less dangerous on the roads than young men. But now with cell phones over the last 15, 20 years, that's changed the equation because they're texting and talking and they're distracted driving. Rick can tell you how many occasions people get hit when they're stopped. It's not the bad weather. I grew up in New England. It's the beautiful weather like today in which they're not paying attention and they're playing with their phones. Because even a foolish person doesn't play around in bad weather. When there's a storm or other things, they focus on their business.
Right.
But when they're playing with their phones, and everybody's seen it, the texting and the talking and not paying attention to what they're doing, distracted driving is a very real thing, and it's just terrible. It happened to me on 95, and that's why I really preach to people. This thing with cell phones and being hands-free is very, very important. When you see people who are driving that way with distracted driving, you have to be aware of that so that you can protect yourself with the proper insurance coverage.
And Brian, it's not just family members that do it. I've got a case right now where a tractor-trailer driver was nodding off and falling asleep, and he put on an action movie to help keep him awake. So he admitted in deposition to watching an action movie at the time of the crash. And Sheifalika, going back to the lady I talked about in the beginning, we were able to get her a full recovery because we had that dash cam that showed that tractor trailer was coming into her lane at the time of the crash.
Wow. You know, I think that's a great idea, not just for personal safety, but just to be able to document if something was to happen, especially for women on the roads today. Even if you're traveling by yourself, if you're single, it's good to have a dash cam.
Absolutely.
Just to document anything.
Recommend
Absolutely. They have audio, so you're right. It's a really good thing, yes.
Very much.
All right. Well, we're about to take a quick little break, but you are listening to Legal Live on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. I'm Sheifalika, and I'm joined today by Brian and Rick. We will be right back after this quick break. Alrighty, we are back. You are listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. I'm Sheifalika, and I'm joined today by Brian and Rick. Our phone number is 855-765-1045. We'd love to hear from you today. We're having some interesting conversations about how to protect yourself on the roads, how to deal with the timeliness of getting a case filed if you need it, how to give formal notice to the city or to government organizations if you have to sue them, if you're in a collision with them.
That's one aspect of tort reform that may be going on right now, and I think Rick can deal with a couple of the other things that are there beyond the statute of limitations. One of them is the amount of comparative negligence, and I'll let Rick address that one.
What does that mean?
Comparative negligence is anytime there's any type of accident, whether you go into a store and you slip and fall on a substance in the store or there's a motor vehicle crash, the jury is always allowed to allocate the fault between the individual who's bringing the claim and the company or the individual against whom the claim is being brought. And they can always point fault to both of them, and sometimes even to an individual or a company that's not a part of the lawsuit.
Right. Say 1,000 people walked through this store this morning, and yet you fell. Why is it 1,000 people didn't have a problem walking in our store, and you fell?
That sounds like blaming the victim.
Well, it is blaming the victim.
It is, and they get
much so.
They get to do that. And so right now in Florida, it's different than Georgia. Georgia, it is. If you are half at fault if the jury determines you to be half at fault for causing your own accident, then you get no recovery whatsoever.
Oh,
half or more, and you're out.
They're changing it, or they want to change it to something similar in Florida. Right now, if the jury comes back and says you're 90% at fault for causing your accident, you would collect 10% of whatever the damages were that you were able to prove at trial. Now what they're saying is if you are 51% at fault as a plaintiff or an individual bringing a claim, if you are 51% at fault, you will not collect anything. So they are trying to change that.
How is that justice in any way? Like, first of all, how do you even qualify or quantify fault?
Well, a jury gets to do that. And it's funny because you think that 6 people would have a hard time determining where they would want to go as a group to lunch. Yet, all too often, very often, most of the time, they're able to reach a decision. And when you're evaluating a case, you come from the perspective of the burden of proof rests with the person who brought it, the plaintiff. And what's the easiest answer to a question you don't like, you don't understand, you disagree with? The answer is no.
Yeah.
And even if the answer is yes, what Rick is making the point is that if they assign a comparative negligence, greater than 51% upon the person, then your case, the jury may think that they're awarding them something because of their comparative negligence. They're going to get something for what they've been through, be it a driving situation or a fall. Instead, they receive nothing, if that's in fact what the law's changed to.
Wow.
And consumers need to be aware of that because frequently there's a lot of dispute about various things that take place. And then the question is, if I bear some responsibility for this, I don't bear half or more responsibility, but jurors are very unpredictable.
That's interesting. So as attorneys in court, when you're in a trial explaining the situation of your client that you're trying, the plaintiff, for example, your job is to provide that burden of proof to the jury and to the court.
To meet the burden of
proof.
To
meet it.
That's
right.
Meet or
so you have to explain these types of concepts to the jury as well as your client, because a lot of people don't even think this way.
I understand. They're not expected to think that way. In most situations, it's just when they get into court and then they hear what the law and the instructions are. But people bring their natural tendencies and biases, their experiences in life to any situation.
That's
and
true.
It's difficult enough, because the work that we do, we're trying to do it on behalf of people who've been, in effect, wronged.
Yeah.
And they've had profound changes in their lives, medical, emotional, employment-wise, family-wise, and they're entitled to their day of justice. They're entitled to a remedy. And the court system we have, the civil court system, is the best in the world here. And it's just something we have to keep following and keep working at our entire lives to maintain that, to maintain those standards so that we can do our job on behalf of people who have been affected that way.
And when we go to court, speaking of the burden of proof, for us in a civil case or an injury case, one of the issues we have to explain right off the top is that our burden is by a preponderance of the evidence, which is 51% or more, as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what many people will come into thinking it is, because as we were talking about the Alex Murdaugh trial, and everybody's saying he has to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not the case in a civil lawsuit. We are preponderance of the evidence, 51% or more. So we do carry the burden on every issue that's brought up in the trial. So we have to prove our case by 51% or more, but we have to explain that difference to the jury. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt like it is in a criminal case.
Very difficult.
I see. I love learning things like this on this show. That's one thing that Legal Live really does, not just for the community, but for me. I learned so much about the difference between civil cases and criminal law. And so for civil cases, you have to prove a preponderance.
Greater weight.
That's a great word, by the way. I love words.
Because we're lawyers, we can't just say 51% or more. Yeah. We have to use a fancy legal term for it.
Of course you do, because y'all get paid the big bucks to use the big words. But I think it's interesting that the stereotype, I guess, and people get their information about the law from TV shows and media and movies. And so we're always thinking, you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person is guilty, but that's only in criminal. In civil, it's more like, you gotta prove more than the other guy, that they're more at fault than you, and it seems really subjective to me. It seems like a hard uphill battle for the plaintiff bringing a case when they have been wronged in a situation. Providing that your client isn't necessarily making up the story, but has actual evidence to back up their claims.
And we do have to have actual evidence, but it's that 51%. But there's also, frequently there is that concern, I think, out there when we have a client that that maybe it's being made up, or there's something there that we're trying to make something that may not be there. So, but we speak to doctors, and before we go to trial and outline everything. And so And the doctor can't say that it's possible. Has to say that it's to a reasonable degree of medical probability or a reasonable degree of medical certainty,
Right.
Which is again a fancy
Gotcha.
way of saying it's more likely than not.
Right.
So,
More likely than not. You're more guilty than not guilty.
Well, guilty is not a word we like to use.
Oh, it isn't?
No, not in our world.
What do you use?
Well,
More
in regard to when you're talking about,
negligent
your medical situation, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about not only creating a condition, but possibly aggravating it. You could have a bad back, and you've done a little bit of chiropractic over the last 10 years. That's been the extent of it. Then you're involved in a wreck, and they said, oh, you've had 10 years of chiropractic. And now they have MRIs that show you have multiple herniated discs, and you're looking at surgery. Excuse me, but I was with a chiropractor. I was doing fine my whole life, and now I'm looking at surgery. Oh, it's not really connected to this crash at all. So this crash had absolutely nothing to do with it. That's what you're saying. Yeah, that's what happens.
or if you looked at an MRI if Brian and I had an MRI of our neck or our low back,
Yeah.
even if we had no prior neck and back problems, if you looked at our MRI at our ages, absolutely we're going to have arthritis and
Right.
degenerative changes in there. 100% chance of that.
Guess what? We have the body of people over 60. That's what happens. And it's just, they take that and they manipulate, and some people
That's so
manipulate
sad.
that.
And say that that our problems, even though we didn't have any problems
Right.
prior to the crash, if we have them afterwards, that
Yeah.
the problems are all associated with that. Because you can't get around the MRI, and you can't get around the fact that people of our age are going to have arthritic changes in our neck and back.
You're not in your 60s the same way you were in your 20s. And jurors go, yeah, that's true. And they said, inevitably this was going to happen anyway.
Gotcha.
Really? There's some people who are doing quite well in their 60s without neck or back issues.
Wow.
Brian just gave our ages up, by the way.
Ah.
I think they could find that out rather quickly if they look on the website to see how long we've been around. But I listen.
Yeah.
I've been blessed. I've had a great time. Great career. I've really enjoyed all the things I've done in my time.
Nice.
And-
I like that.
and-
Very positive people, you guys. I like this.
And one of the topics you kind of touched on too was the medicine. That's doing
Yes.
what we do. I think Brian and I probably have learned as much medicine over the course of our careers as we have law, because we're dealing with every one of our cases has some type of medical component to it that we have to deal with one way or the other. So, and that's an interesting part of what we do.
I like that. It's almost an interdisciplinary education that you get along the way, and you need your doctors for your client to speak the way that will make sense in the court so that you can meet that 50 or be less than that 51%
Absolutely.
accountability.
You got it.
Well, I'm learning so much today. I love this show. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by 104.5 WOKV Jacksonville's News and Talk. Feel free to give us a call. We've got a few minutes left of the show. We'd really love to hear from you. Our number is 855-765-1045. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. Feel free to give us a call at 855-765-1045. We've been having a lot of really interesting conversations here, you guys. And in the last few minutes of our show, what do you think is something that is very important for people to know right now?
I think it's important for people right now to follow what's going on in the legislature for some of these changes that are coming up, not just for tort reform, but for some of the other things that are currently going on that could be changing the law as it exists in the state for many decades. I'm not saying it's good or for bad, but I do think it's important that people be aware of it because it is going to have direct effects. I know there's a lot of discussion about legislation involving parents and their interactions with schools and their school boards.
That's right.
Very important issues, very important. And I completely support parents' rights to have absolute knowledge of everything that's going on. A lot of discussion about books, the various books that are going to be permitted in schools and school board approval and other things. So there's a lot of really important issues that are currently being debated in the legislature and law that will be based on that. And it's important for people who are voters to follow all that and to decide what they think to be best for them and for their families. And I think to be informed on all these issues is just essential for everybody who's out there.
And there's so much information out there, Brian, that you can keep yourself abreast of what's going on.
Right.
Just go on the internet, see what bills are being debated in the House and in the Senate over in Tallahassee, because there are a lot of things there that affect people.
Right.
And And if you see something that is potentially going to be passed, don't be afraid to get involved. Contact your representative, contact your senator, and it's easy to do via email.
That's a good point. It's our civic duty to stand up for our rights right now. I do see a phone call on the docket for us. We've got Stan, who's got a product liability question about a water filter. What's going on, Stan? Tell us all about it. I believe we're getting him on the line right now, and we've got him. Take it away, Stan.
Oh, good afternoon, folks. Got a question for you. Got a question for you about. I guess it would be product liability, because I've been buying water filters for my home, whole house water filters for 30 years, and I bought a water filter with sediment and charcoal, some kind of filtering, and in 2 days it clogged.
Interesting.
Well,
so what's your question? Is it?
Well, the problem is the clog, which I later discovered, caused my water pump to burst a pipe, and the pipe ran all night and put 2 inches of water in a finished room in my house.
Oh, goodness! I'm sorry to hear that, Stan.
Yeah. So, but the crazy part is when I finally looked, I discovered that it was the water filter, and then I looked at the packaging to it because I was going to take it back to Home Depot. The backside of the package says, "Well, the product, we're not responsible for you taking it out or getting it diagnosed or any consequential damages from the product."
Interesting.
What I would do, Stan, is first of all I would make sure that I kept that filter, keep the packaging, keep the packaging that it came in, because one potential course on a product's liability case is that the warning or whatever warning was on there was defective, and so
or inadequate,
or inadequate, and so I would keep that. I would certainly photograph everything that you can see visually, and then have somebody come out and inspect it that could tell you, that would kind of recite for you what you just told us, somebody that's got the qualifications to do it, so that that flooding that was in your other room can be tracked back to this filter and to the clog.
It sounds like there's substantial damage. Did you make a claim under your homeowner's insurance for all this?
Well, no, because our homeowner's insurance has a $5,000 all other peril, and
respectfully, it sounds like you're going to pass that with the replacement of the pump, and certainly the damage to that room could well exceed the $5,000 deductible, is the way I'm hearing it expressed to me. So I do think your homeowner's insurance, they can, if they don't take the claim, they could certainly give you some information about the right person to document that. And if it's an issue you have to take up with Home Depot or the manufacturer of it at a later point to small claims court, depending on how much you're out of pocket, because this is the kind of thing in which you probably going to, if you retain an attorney, you're going to have to hire somebody probably on an hourly basis for that, because of the nature of the product issue. But it's something you can bring into small claims court, and the procedures down there are very clear in the clerk's office, and they will help you with that, to bring that type of claim if that's necessary. But Rick is absolutely right. The documentation is the key, and to keep everything connected to it, the filter, the packaging, your receipt, and then all of that, and then to have somebody, a plumber or somebody else, to give an explanation and possibly even testify for you as to what actually took place, because it could be very confusing to a person who's not familiar with how that works. Certainly to me, I am not the best person to ask about plumbing or anything else. And so if you were explaining it to me, if a plumber said, oh no, this filter definitely should not have done what it did, and it caused this, and this destroyed the pump, and that's why the water's all over the place, I would understand that coming from an expert like a plumber.
And I would also make sure you let them know that this happened with the filter that you purchased, so that they can have the opportunity to come out and perform an inspection themselves.
Absolutely. But do not turn over the materials to them. Let them photograph it. Let them look at it. But don't turn over anything, because you may never see it again. And that's an issue.
I took a boatload of pictures of the water level and the water throughout the entire room and the pump room where the pump is located. And I talked to I built a house 31 years ago. So and I did most of the plumbing and the electrical work and a lot of work back when, but of course that was 31 years ago.
Sure.
Gotcha.
So I've got documented photos of the water damage. I've got the receipt from Home Depot. I've got the brand new filter that I took out of the plastic just to get the label out, which I was disappointed to read that back disclaimer on the back of it.
Right.
But I thought at first, well, it's just old PVC fitting that broke, and I needed to fix it, which I did. And a day later, it blew again.
My
So,
goodness.
yeah, so I consulted a plumber in town that I know, and he said, well, you can try a much more rigid cast iron fitting first before the PVC, and try that. And that's when I discovered that, no, the filter was not allowing the water to go. And
Wow.
the water pump just built up enough pressure and broke the PVC pipe.
And Stan, if you can get us your information off the air, maybe we'll take a look at that policy for you to see whether or not you can make a claim against your homeowner's insurance and what the viability of that is.
Great.
That's right. Yeah, stay on the line, and our producer Daniel will take your number and information. I'm really sorry to hear this happen to you, but thank you so much for calling. And we're going to find a solution for you. And it's good that you're documenting everything right now.
Thanks for your call, Stan.
Thank you, folks. Have a good
All
weekend.
right.
Thank you. You too.
You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back again next week. Have a great day.